So, this is my collection of books from A Song of Ice and Fire. I really love this series by George R. R. Martin. Of course, adapted into the famous A Game of Thrones show on HBO. I was such a fan of the show that I wanted to read the books. I saw this collection on Amazon and I just had to buy it. It looks so beautiful. Now, this is hopefully not going to be the complete set of this series. I think they're better than the show, but I would love to reread them because it's been a few years, and I thought, why not make some videos to go through the journey and share my thoughts and reactions. And I love the sound of books and ASMR. So I thought, why not start with A Game of Thrones, Book 1 of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. This one is for Melinda. Here's the map. I love the whole world. It's crazy that someone could make such a detailed world all by themselves. The north, the south. Prologue. We should start back, Garrett urged as the woods began to grow dark around them. The wildlings are dead. Do the dead frighten you? Sir Raymor Royce asked, with just a hint of a smile. Garrett did not rise to the bait. He was an old man, past 50, and he had seen the lordlings come and go. Dead is dead, he said. We have no business with the dead. I felt like this chapter was a great introduction to the whole series and this book. It sets up an immediate threat and it establishes so much of the world. And it immediately grabs your intrigue. And I think it's a good magic teaser because so much of the world is grounded. And it has a couple deaths. So immediately you feel as though this is setting the tone for a dark and brutal world, but with some fantasy elements and some realism. The first POV is Bran. I felt like this chapter also does a great job of setting up the world. George R. R. Martin has said in an interview that this was his first vision of the whole series. The summer snows and discovering the direwolves. I felt like, again, he establishes the brutality and the environment of Winterfell, and the weather, and the characters. There's so much foreshadowing in this first chapter. It's a chapter I like to reread over and over. Here's Catelyn. She's a foreigner in this land, so it's a great contrast to Bran, and it talks a bit about how she moved to Winterfell to marry Ned, and I feel like it establishes their dynamic very well and that intimacy, but also establishes that she's not 100% familiar with everything in this world yet. And Daenerys, such another shift in tone about this young girl who's very innocent. It's a little brother dynamic and very perverted. So I don't know if it's aged the best, but it does give you a reason to root for her character, because she feels so hopeless and exploited. Then the Eddard chapter. I mean, this is when you really start to feel the first conflict of the story, the inciting incident of where you start to feel like, oh, things are getting into gear now because Ned is leaving his home. Eddard is one of my favorite characters. I think he's super underrated. People give him a bad rap for being dumb, but I think he's actually very honorable and intelligent. He's just missing a few pieces of the puzzle. This is Daenerys' second chapter, I believe. Yeah. And this is when you start to see that she's getting some agency and getting some confidence. This is where the king is first seen and introduced, and I think King Robert is such a great foil for Ned. Someone so bombastic as compared to Ned's stoic nature. And I love the wistful feeling of Ned's memories and his internal struggle as he remembers Lyanna. Again, so much foreshadowing. And then Jon is the next chapter, which I think is fitting for people who know the fan theories out there. But I think he's a typical hero. Very brooding and angsty young kid who wants to be a part of something very honorable and heroic seeming. And this is the chapter where you really get to know a bit more of Tyrion Lannister. I love the scene between them. And here's Catelyn. I feel like this is where you start to get into the thick of the murder plot. which adds another dimension to the story. And things start to get really interesting. Arya, such a wild child and such a great character. You see how much of a goalie that Joffrey is. At least you get a hint of it. And Bran. I mean, this is a famous chapter. It really sets off the whole story, and I think it's the first real twist of the story. But 90 pages in, that's pretty good. It's very early on, and you just don't expect it. And then Tyrion, this chapter. Yeah, I love the interactions with Jon Snow and him. Hopefully, we'll get to see more of that as the series goes on. But I think Jon and Tyrion are one of my favorite characters in the whole series. I remember when I first read the Daenerys chapters, I thought they were so engaging, but now that I'm older, I feel less comfortable with these chapters, simply because she's 13 in the books, which is very weird for me. I think the Ned chapters in this book are so engaging. It's just so packed full of intrigue and mystery. And it's a great POV to set up King's Landing. Littlefinger, such an interesting character. Every time he pops up, there's full of twists and turns. You can't predict him. I think that Tyrion is a great foil for Jon. I remember reading an interview that George R. R. Martin said Catelyn was not meant to leave for King's Landing. But as he was writing, he discovered that her character had to go. And that changed the trajectory of the whole series. I think it's a beautifully written chapter, and I think I can see how it was so compelling while writing that he decided to just change the series based on writing this chapter. No, Sansa. I think it's a lot of hate from the fandom. But I like her chapters a lot. They feel pretty they feel well written, and you really get to see Sansa's psychology. I mean, she's just a little kid, so I tend to excuse a lot of her behavior. But you really just despise Joffrey after this chapter. this is the chapter where you see Ned really be a father. And I think that's really interesting to see. It makes you really love him, because he has to make not just tough choices as a leader, but as a father, as a family leader. Now, this next brand chapter I think is really engaging because you feel like, oh, he's never gonna wake up, or he's possibly gonna die, but right when you flip the page and it says Bran, you realize that he has a bigger part to play in the whole book. And that's what I love about the POV chapters, is even just the title can evoke an emotion in you. And Bran's chapters tend to be very trippy and full of symbolism, which I love. And him waking up is such a shock. But Catelyn, when she arrives at King's Landing, I think you start to feel a lot of respect for her, at least I do, because she's being very brave, I feel, and going by her own rules. And this twist at the end is just keeps you going. The imp said Littlefinger as Lord Varys watched her face. Tyrion Lannister. Then you go to Jon's chapter. Sir Alistair is such a asshole. And you start to really fall in love with the brothers here. Gren and Donal Noy. And I love that you're reading this chapter with Littlefinger's claims in mind, and you start really analyzing, did Tyrion really do it? How could he have done it? If you want to see more, please comment, like, and subscribe. Subscribe to my Patreon if you want to further support me continuing to make these videos. And thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.